Time for us to have a look at the stories that are making headlines around the world this morning. We start with the Gulf news, which leads with China and Russia's veto of that UN Security Council resolution that would have threatened the Syrian regime with sanctions if they refused to withdraw troops from towns and cities and continue using heavy weapons, basically trying to get the Annan six-point plan implemented.
How about this one, Martine? Could be more problems, really, for the Olympic Games, because UK border guards are at a strike on the eve of the Olympics and on the busiest day in the history of the airport, Heathrow Airport. That story, of course, leading the Daily Telegraph.
The International Herald Tribune notes that amid much griping, the German Parliament's approved a rescue plan for Spanish banks.
What's the word for griping in German? I don't know. The world is facing a food crisis, reports the Financial Times, as America's worst drought in 50 years pushes corn and soybean prices to record highs.
Bad news for homeowners in the Times of London, with a warning from an IMF report that there could be an extended housing market slump in the UK.
And the Independent carries the story that's easing, I should say, Britain's post-Wimbledon Andy Murray blues. The increasing likelihood that this weekend, the cyclist Bradley Wiggins is about to become the first British winner of the Tour de France.
Well, Bundeep Singh Rangar, chairman of IndusView, is here with us this morning to go through the papers. Morning. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Starting off with, I was going to say the diplomacy at the United Nations, but actually it's a failure of diplomacy, isn't it?
Well, it's the third time that Russia, in concert with China, have voted against effective sanctions by the UN and therefore given very little option for the Western powers to use an international mandate to go in there, which now begs the question, will the United States find alternatives? And will they find alternatives either in the auspices of NATO or unilaterally under some, I would say, guise of perhaps potential sponsors, terrorists out there, Al-Qaeda elements out there, or chemical weapons that are supposedly there, because there's simply no way to let the situation continue.
It doesn't seem to be, given, of course, what we've been seeing, what we've been hearing out of Syria, there doesn't seem to be, I mean, if that hasn't budged Russia and China, I mean, as you say, perhaps chemical weapons, I'm not too sure, but it doesn't seem like there's not, there's much out there that would see them, move on this.
Well, the problem is there's very few allies that Russia has in the Middle East, with Iraq's regime change, Syria, Saudi Arabia and the rest of the part being sort of not really in the Russian camp. Syria is one not only ally of Putin and the other way, and Putin being an ally of Syria, but it's one satellite state that Russia has maintained in that region. Now, the hypocrisy, of course, if the West does not go in, is then very clear, because Syria doesn't have one thing that Libya and Iraq had. The three-letter word, YL. Syria is not an oil producer of any significance. So if it doesn't go in, it'll be an extreme exposure of hypocrisy, and that's what the West has to watch out for.
But there's also the matter of its the regional influence and its position geographically, insofar as it's made up of a whole sort of network of different ethnic groups which could overspill. I mean, this is the argument that's put forward, isn't it, by Western diplomats as to why they have to treat Syria with a certain caution.
Well, you have a similar regime and a similar population to Iraq. You've got a Ba'ath-led Shia Sunni divided population. But where Syria differs, of course, is that it's very close to Israel, and it has past disputes over the Golan Heights. So it's a sensitive area, even more so, given its proximity to Israel and the past history of conflict with them.
Okay. Should we move on?
Absolutely.
Talk about the Daily Telegraph. This gets my goat, I tell you. Border guards to strike on the eve of the Olympics. I mean, Matt, there's the cartoonist Matt. I mean, it's just classic. We don't have it on screen, but he's got a bunch of people in a swimming pool that's synchronized striking, because that's basically what it is in a nutshell, what we've been seeing of late, isn't it?
Well, if you get that irked, imagine the average Joe public getting really irked, or the average visitor coming in a day before the opening ceremony of the Olympics and not having sufficient border staff and therefore long queues. Now, I know in Britain we're used to queues, but this will go even beyond what we saw last November when there was the last strikes. And I guess the concern is twofold. One, you may have a domino effect if there's talk about train workers going on strike at the same time or about the same time. And also, just imagine if you're one of the 70,000 volunteers who are working unpaid.
Exactly.
It's kind of disheartening for you to be out there working unpaid and then see paid staff demanding more pay at a very critical time when Britain is under the world's glare for the Olympics.
But if you're a striking worker, if you're a worker, a member of a union, and you feel that you've got a legitimate complaint against government austerity cuts, what do? You hit, and you hit where it will hurt most.
So the big question, of course, here is this posturing, and will they eventually back down? They're just kind of saying we're flexing our muscles to show what we can do, or will they actually go through, and who will call that bluff?
Yeah, and Martin, that's an absolutely valid point. But why do we see this? Where's this unity? Where's the rallying around? I mean, I don't think we've seen this to the extent in other past games, because the public rally around them and support the games. I mean,
well, need I say some of that probably got lost with the whole G4S issue, and you've seen the whole security mayhem. So people saying, you know what, there's already problems. It might be time to just flare up some more. And only in this instance, you can't have the army come out and rescue.
And also, has the argument been made sufficiently that there's going to be enough benefit from accruing from the Olympics to the country as a whole? I'm not sure that that argument has been made successfully.
There's a mixed track record if Olympics actually benefit in the economy or not. So.
Right.
Apart from the Sydney games. But anyway, can we move on?
Moving on to the International Herald Tribune, and why were German legislators forced back into the Bundestag to pass this rescue package for Spanish banks? I mean, the operative word here is griping, I think.
Griping, yeah.
Well, this is the 10th time that Germany's voted in something since this Eurozone crisis began. And so you can see how, fiercely debated it is and how critically important it is, because it's the biggest weight in the Eurozone economies. But they will. Ultimately, if they have to safeguard the euro and they have the most to benefit out of it, they will work to save Spanish banks, because otherwise the fallout is too great. If you could save Greece, well, Spain's far more valuable, and you don't want to have the same situation happen in Italy, or some even speculating France, then you're really in trouble.
And much, much bigger. But the reason the members of parliament in Germany were dragged back from holidays to vote on that is because this is off the back of Angela Merkel, right? And the government getting a slap on the wrist. I mean, because they can't just decide on their own. I mean, they need these votes. So
they need these votes, and then there's a big court ruling on September the 12th to formalize and make permanent the 500 billion euro bailout fund. And that's awaiting a German signature, which is basically awaiting the court ruling. So this is actually one roadblock they had to get past ahead of that September 12th vote, and that's one they would look out for.
Since we're talking about the Eurozone, it's not necessarily with Germany, but just briefly, what's your take? Because I think it seems rather worrying, this negative interest rate where we're seeing, right? So we talk about the Spanish government having to pay investors 7%, very high, unsustainable. Yeah. On the flip side, we're seeing investors pour money into safe havens like Germany, Netherlands, example. But they're almost, the investors are paying those governments to take their money on. They're not getting a return.
That's actually a really astute observation, because what it means that investors are seeking safety, and they're seeking a yield safety, even if that means negative yields, because they set up a hedging strategy saying if the euro unravels, then certain countries with strong economies, Austria, Germany, Netherlands, Finland, will support independent currencies that are stronger.
Right.
And therefore parking their funds into bonds from those countries is a way of saving themselves, as opposed to being in a Spanish-denominated currency, which right now Spain has a borrowing cost that's north of 7%, compared to a negative borrowing cost for Germany or Switzerland or Netherlands.
We're going to have to rush you, sorry,
Sure.
Time is against us. The Times, the IMF giving us a rather bleak assessment of the UK economy, but the IMF is known, isn't it, as a fairly sort of pessimistic institution.
Well, that's their job, right? They have to give the worst case scenario many times. But what's disturbing is that Britain got the biggest downgrade of all the developed economies, and one of the things they pointed out was that the housing market needs to be repriced and corrected, because it's still, and I think it's led by London in large part, because the rest of the country is not as high as London is, just continue to grow at 10-15% year on year. It needs to be corrected. So if you're in London as a house owner, a little bit more worrying. If you're outside, probably not. And with the grain of salt that the IMF is incredibly conservative there.
Well, lastly, in 5-10 seconds, will we go win?
We got to win it. He's saying that he's going to win, so I'm going to back him and say this is going to be a great thing for British cycling, and all those free bikes you see around London will be probably going down faster than you normally expect them to.
That'd be perfect in time for the Olympics if he does.
There we go.
Bundeep Singh, Rangar, thank you very much indeed for taking us through the newspapers this morning, and thank you very much for being with us.
Okay, we'll see you soon.